بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل وسلم على محمد وآل محمد. قال سيدنا ومولانا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام: بعيدا فحشه لينا قوله غائبا منكره حاضرا معروفه، إلى قوله إن سمت لم يغمه سمته. آمنا بالله وآمنا بكلمات أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام. For today's discussion, inshallah, I wanted to take a look at a couple of lines from amongst the most famous sermons of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali alayhi salam, as mentioned within Nahj al-Balagha, a famous sermon known as Khutbat al-Muttaqeen. In this really lengthy sermon, we've taken a look at it in different conversations over many, years in the past, particularly during the month of Ramadan. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he gives a little bit of insight, or he offers different characteristics of those who have taqwa. And before we take a look at these specific words as uttered by the Imam Salamullah alayh, what does it exactly mean to have taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Though it's something that many folks might be familiar with already, nonetheless it's important as a reminder because of how often it is mentioned within the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. To have taqwa is to be in a state of God consciousness, to be in a state of feeling the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the extent that before committing any act of transgression, we feel that we are within the kingdom of God, and thus that prohibits us from committing an act of sin or transgression. And on the flip side, when we are in the midst of performing an act of worship, we feel a sense of the vigilance of God over us, so it transforms our worship into us truly seeing that we are worshiping God in front of us. It is stated that one day, one of the companions of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that when I would see Ja'far ibn Muhammad in prayers, I would see him begging to God in the same way that a poor man were to beg for wealth in the streets. Meaning, to that extent, showing so much emotion, demonstrating via his physical body what was present internal in his heart. And the idea is to reach that state of recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the extent that that which is internal in our hearts and in our souls, it manifests itself externally on our bodies. Not the opposite. The opposite is common. That's what is known as nifaq, hypocrisy. When you show something to others, but in reality that which is within your heart is far different than what you're showing to others. That is obviously not encouraged. Generally, people can't tell the difference, right? But at the end of the day, we know that God can tell the difference. And the idea is for me to cultivate my heart, my soul, to the extent whereby I even stop myself, ideally, from showing to others what is truly in my heart. The believer is one, al-mu'min, huznun fi qalbih, wa bishrun ala wajh, as the hadith it states from the Prophet of God, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, that the believer is the one who has grief in his heart, or in her heart. They look at their own sins, they look at their own transgressions, they're consistently, in a state of humility to Allah Azza wa Jal. But in front of people, they would never know. They would never know because of how many, how kind, how polite, and how sort of normal in their social interactions that they are. And so in this very lengthy sermon, one of the companions of Ali ibn Abi Talib, a man by the name of Hammam, he comes to the Imam and he begins to ask him to outline some of the qualities and the characteristics of those who have taqwa, to see whether or not he is at that stage. And so he utters more than maybe close to 200 different characteristics of those who have this quality. And I wanted to take a look at a couple of them, particularly related to how we speak to others and how we engage others. So in this sermon, the Imam alayhi salam, he reaches the end of it, And he begins to speak to, again, some of these characteristics. He states, for the one who has taqwa, for the one who feels the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ba'idun fuhshuh layyinan qawluh. He states that from them, from those who have taqwa, indecent speech is far from them. They won't curse. They won't utilize poor language. They're going to be so careful and vigilant over the way that they speak that you will never find them speaking poorly. Then the Imam alayhi salam, he continues and he states, layyinan qawluh. How do they speak? They speak in such a way that that his or her words, they're a source of calm. They're lenient with others. They're not concerned with the little things. Someone says, for instance, that when I speak to X person, I feel happy, I feel content, I feel comforted. When people would go to the Prophet ﷺ, he was known for his words of validation. He was known for the way that he would listen to others. When anyone wanted to complain, they would go to the Messenger of God ﷺ, and they would complain, and the Prophet ﷺ, through his words, he would offer again a source of comfort to any and every individual who came to him. And we see this as from amongst the qualities and the seerah of Ahlul Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them as well. So the Imam ﷺ, he utters these 2 points to start with. Number 1, that language that is poor is never uttered from their tongue. And in the famous line from Imam Zayn al-Abidin in Haqqul Lisan, in his work Risalat al-Huquq, a treatise of rights, he states that the believer is the one who deems his or her tongue too noble in the eyes of God to utter any obscenity. Meaning that they're going to be so careful because they know about how incredible of a gift that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through one word, through one utterance, through one statement that I make, I can either change someone's day in a positive way or totally ruin it. I was talking to some individuals earlier today who are going through some challenges in their respective marriage, and they said that this one statement that my husband uttered to me months ago, I can't get rid of it in my mind. This one statement. How can I forgive this one statement? I asked her, I said, did he ask you for forgiveness? He said, numerous times. So why can't you get, why is it so difficult? Because it hurt that much. One line, 2 or 3 sentences, 2 or 3 words. That's it. She can't remove it from her head. No matter how many times you say sorry, how difficult is it to repair, to repair our speech and our language? On the flip side, when someone offers you nice positive words of validation, for instance, you remember that for the rest of your life. You remember that for the rest of the week. It's so important that we recognize how to speak and how to utilize our tongue. Ba'idun fuhshuhu layyinan qawlah. Again, that indecent speech is far from their tongue, and lenient, calm, comforting language is close to them. They're always uttering kind words. The Imam alayhi salam, he continues. He states, غائبا منكره حاضرا معروفه. From the one who has taqwa, from the one who has this conviction and feels the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're never going to see their evil qualities, their indecent qualities in public. We all have. We all have sins. We all have transgressions. We all make mistakes. But in public, that's too distant from us. We're never going to see that. Which is why, when someone passes away, we perform what is known as Salatul Mayyit. We perform this prayer over the dead body. And amongst that which we recite over the believer before we lower them into the grave, we say, Allahumma inni la na'lamu minhu illa khayra. That I don't know anything but good from this man or from this woman. I bear witness, O Allah, that this individual, this believer who I am lowering into the grave at this moment, I don't know any wrong that they have committed. I'm not denying that they may have committed sin. But me and every single one of us bear witness that we don't know anything. To that extent, that's the quality of the believer in the eyes of people. That no one should ever have anything poor to say about us. Of course, between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is different. but to reach that state where when we wrong someone, we're quick to seek forgiveness from them. غائبا منكره حاضرا معروفه. That the only thing that we see, the only thing that they manifest, the Imam alayhi salam, he states, are their good deeds, the virtues. You only see goodness from them, from the way that they speak, the way that they act, the way that they interact, their social sort of behavior. You only see that which is positive. مقبلا خيرا مدبرا شرا. That the one who has taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're always looking to do good, and all of their evil qualities, their indecent qualities, are well behind them. So even though we may know that that person, did some wrong, it was so many years ago that we're so easy to sort of dismiss it. Say, that's who they used to be 10 years ago. They're not like that anymore. We only keep this good opinion of others. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. We only keep this good opinion of others. I was saying this the other day. Somebody had passed away in the community, and I went to the janazah, and they asked me to say a few words and whatnot. And I say, when somebody passes away in your family, in your community, it's very, very easy for everyone to, have a good opinion, or to transform our negative opinion of who they were into only remembering the positive things. And that's encouraged as well, right? You have a family member who passed away, and they had done some wrong, or they had made some mistakes, or you had gotten some argument with them or whatever. It's a sign of a believer, and a responsibility, particularly on family members, to only speak publicly about their good, and to not say, this person used to do this to me, or said this to me, or did that, or missed their prayers, or wasn't, engaged in fasting during the month, whatever it might be. To only, remember the positive. It's easy to do that, because when somebody's gone, you don't want to speak poorly about them. You want to have what is known as husnul dhan. We keep a good opinion of others. For whatever reason, when somebody is alive, we're feel entitled to speak, however we want to about them. No, it should be the same in life and afterlife. So the Imam alayhi salam says that if the muttaqi, go ahead.
Oh, this was just a question to that point, because this one I do want clarification for, because I think this is a question that I do come to a lot, which is that sure, people change. But do they change enough that once someone has broken your trust, that you would be, it almost feels foolish to trust them again?
There's a difference between your individual relationship with that person and what you speak about in public, right? To expose someone else's faults in public, there are exceptions to the rule. But generally the foundation is that's not permissible. There are exceptions. For instance, amongst the most famous ones that we mentioned within Islamic law is in marriage, for instance, right? Someone comes to me and says, Sheikh, can I, what do you think about this woman? What do you think about this guy? For me to marry them. It's my responsibility to speak on everything and open up the door, because that's something that is going to, but it's something that is not going to be relevant to the majority of people. To keep that private between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that which is encouraged.
Thank you.
Of course. حاضرا معروفه مقبلا خيره مدبر شره. Until the Imam alayhi salatu wasalam, he states, ولا ينسى ما ذكر ولا ينابز بالألقاب ولا يضار بالجار. The Imam alayhi salam, he states that amongst the qualities of these believers, specifically with regards to their tongue and the way that they speak, is they don't rush to calling people names. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this within the Holy Quran as well. That even in a way that we mock others or that we tease others, even if it's sarcastic, it's not of the quality of the believer to do so, unless of course it's a term of endearment, And we see this most famously in the story of Luqman, as mentioned within the Holy Quran, chapter 31, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of Luqman and his son. And according to our ahadith, this son of his was someone who disbelieved in God entirely. He rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while Luqman, he was a believer, and it was his responsibility to teach his son about God. Yet when he tries to teach him, he consistently addresses him as, Ya Bunayya, for instance, which is a term of endearment. Oh my dear son, oh my beloved son. Even though he was someone who rejected everything that Luqman stood for, morally, ethically, theologically, so on and so forth. Where it's allowed to offer someone or give someone a nickname only in terms of endearment is permissible, not that it's forbidden entirely, but at the very least, it's distant from the qualities of those who have taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يُضَارُ بِالْجَارِ. And the one who has taqwa, he doesn't harm his or her neighbor, right? Doesn't mean only your physical neighbor, the one that you live next to in your home or in your apartment, but those around you as well. That we, again, those around us, they feel comfort just being in our presence. So I'm going to go back to this term taqwa for just one moment that we started with. According to some of our ahadith, there are different levels of what it means to have taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this level of a station of God consciousness. One level is when the believer is in a state whereby our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is such that even though everyone around us might be committing acts of sin or transgression, we know how to control our own hearts and our own souls as to not fall to that act of sin or vice. We live in a world where we are so bound by what is happening in society that it's easy to get caught up in committing acts of sin or transgression. When everyone else is talking poorly about someone and we're in that company, it's easy for us to also talk poorly about them, for instance. But beyond that, we go and we see, for instance, that the higher level of taqwa is when the believer is in such a state where their presence transforms everyone else around them. Not only are they stopping themselves from committing sin, but just their presence reminds everyone else about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it elevates their sense whereby they will say, no, I'm in the company of person X or Y or Z, there's no way that I want to commit an act of sin or transgression, because they remind me of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You follow? And that's the highest level of taqwa. That's why one of the titles of Imam Ali alayhi salam is Imam al-Muttaqeen, the leader of those who have taqwa. Because through his remembrance, we stop ourselves from committing acts of transgression. Salamullah alayhi. وَلَا يُنَابِذُ بِالْأَلْقَابِ وَلَا يُضَارُ بِالْجَارِ. They would never harm their neighbor. وَلَا يَشْمَتُ بِالْمَصَائِبِ وَلَا يَدْخُلُ فِي الْبَاطِلِ وَلَا يَخْرُجُ مِنَ الْحَقِّ. وَلَا يَشْمَتُ بِالْمَصَائِبِ. The Imam alayhi salam continues. Could be interpreted in several different ways. Number one is they don't get too affected by misfortunes or difficulties or trials or tribulations. Meaning that they are consistently in a state where they entrust their affairs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While another interpretation of the statement is that when others are going through difficulties and others are going through different trials and tribulations, they're at their support. Again, through their words, through their actions, through their efforts, that they are the first to be there to support those who are going through difficulties. وَلَا يَدْخُلُ فِي الْبَاطِلِ وَلَا يَخْرُجُ مِنَ الْحَقِّ. And amongst the qualities of those who have taqwa is they don't fall into acts of wrongdoing. Not every day they're going to fall and make a mistake. When they do, they're going to immediately turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they're going to be careful with their actions. They're going to be careful with their words. They're going to be diligent. They're going to be focused. They're going to make sure that they're doing the best that they can, and again, so vigilant over their own behaviors and actions as to be mindful consistently over their hearts. The famous example that we give in Islamic ethics, for instance, which state that caring for our souls and caring for our heart requires that much focus as to make sure that we don't lose sight of it for even one moment. If you're driving a car, for instance, and you were to lose focus for one moment, you're responding to a text message, or you're looking to the passenger who's seated next to you, or you're looking behind you, or you get caught up in the distractions while you're driving, whatever it might be, losing focus for 1 second, how detrimental can that be? Not only to yourself, not only to all the passengers who are sitting with you, but everyone and anyone else on the road as well. For one moment of losing concentration in what it is that you're doing. When it comes to our hearts, when it comes to our souls, losing focus for one moment can be that much more detrimental. It could be the cause of, committing, ruining someone's life, ruining an entire family, just because of the way that we speak, just because of the way that we act. The lack of response, the lack of care, the lack of diligence, the lack of focus can be, such a sort of traumatic experience, not only for ourselves, but for those around us as well. So again, to be careful. وَلَا يَدْخُلُ فِي الْبَاطِلِ وَلَا يَخْرُجُ وَيَخْرُجُ مِنَ الْحَقِّ. And then the Imam alayhi salam, he continues. He states, in samata lam yaghummahu samtuh. Going back to speech, the Imam alayhi salam, he states, and that when the one who has taqwa is silent, his or her silence does not grieve them. What does that mean? That sometimes speaking out loud is an obligation. When you see someone else doing wrong, when you have the opportunity to speak truth to power, when you have the opportunity to call out an act of injustice, those are moments when speaking is a religious obligation. But then there are other moments where silence is that which is preferred. In Islamic law, amongst our obligations is to perform what is known as Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, to enjoin others toward good and to forbid them from evil. If you see someone, for instance, not praying, it's your responsibility to encourage them to pray, for instance. If you see someone speaking poorly to somebody, it's your responsibility to go to them and say, hey, you shouldn't use that type of language. To enjoin good and to forbid evil. But we have an abundance of hadith, for instance, that tell us that the style in which you speak, if you don't have a technique, if you don't have a methodology, if you fear that the way that you communicate with someone is only going to lead to more detriment, then it's an obligation for you to keep your mouth quiet. To that extent, it becomes an obligation for us to learn how to speak and to also learn how to be silent. It's hard because everyone loves to give their input and everyone loves to give their opinion. But amongst the qualities of those who have taqwa, in samata lam yaghummahu samtuh, that when they're silent, their silence doesn't bother them. They're not concerned. It doesn't boil inside of them. Because they know that sometimes keeping quiet is the best course of action. And it's important, of course, naturally to consistently keep this in mind. When are some moments when silence entirely is preferable? Amongst the moments when silence are preferable, for instance, is when you could speak poorly about someone, but you bite your tongue. Someone gives you an open rein and an open opportunity. Hey, what do you think about this person? Again, outside of those exceptions. And you could say a whole long list of everything despicable about that individual, but you bite your tongue. And instead, you say, Allah is great. And you walk away from that situation. And we recite in Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, for instance, that, oh Allah, every time when you give me the opportunity, or when the opportunity arises for me to speak poorly about someone, allow for me to instead drown myself in praise of you, so that I'm not uttering my tongue in speaking poorly about anyone. How sort of important it is. So amongst those moments when silence is encouraged or even an obligation is when we have the opportunity to speak poorly about someone, but hold ourselves back. Amongst those moments when silence is encouraged is when you're hungry, when you're tired. It's the easiest moment when we say the wrong things. Take a look at all of those times, even during the month of Ramadan, when we are in a state, hopefully, of taqwa, but we're too hungry, we're too tired, and we speak in a way that we should not be speaking. It's so important for us to check ourselves at that moment, to bite our tongue, so to say, and to remind ourselves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, I don't need to have this conversation right now. I don't need to get into this argument at this particular moment. Amongst those times when silence is encouraged is when you have the opportunity to take lesson. This is hard. How many opportunities for us to learn are around us consistently? All the time we have an opportunity to take lesson. When you're listening to something, you have the opportunity to listen to it. وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنِ فَانْسِتُوا لَهُ, as the verse of the Quran states, when the Quran is being recited, then keep quiet and listen to it. And listen to it so that you can take benefit from that which is being recited. Everyone loves to speak. Not many people like to listen. Amongst the qualities of the Prophet ﷺ that made him so unique, that made him so great, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to within the whole of Quran, but was a critique of the people of Mecca. I say this all the time. It's incredible. In chapter 9, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that when the people of Mecca, they wanted to annoy the Prophet, they would say, huwa udhunun, that he's an ear. All this guy does is listen. The quality, or amongst the greatest qualities of the Prophet, is that he would listen, not always speak. There were times when he would speak, undoubtedly. There were times when he would speak aggressively toward those who were committing acts of injustice. But other times, the Prophet ﷺ, he knew when to keep quiet. So it's important once in a while, not only when you're listening to something, and I say this often as well, is that to truly listen not only with your ears, but to listen with our heart. When the Quran is being recited, when we're listening to the hadith of the Prophet and his family, alayhi salam, when we're listening to the du'as of Ahlul Bayt, listen and take heed. In samata lam yaghummahu samta. The Imam alayhi salam states, if he is silent, his silence does not grieve him. I'll leave you all with this last verse of the Holy Quran, chapter 16, verse 125, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offers us a little bit more insight with regards to how we should speak. He states subhanahu wa ta'ala, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. He states, call people to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة, but by being wise, by using wisdom, and according to our ahadith, this wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to is knowing how to speak and knowing when to speak. Not only is there a method of how to communicate truths to others, but in addition to that, there is also a method with regards to when to communicate things to others. Not only when you're not hungry and you're not tired, but how about the person that you're speaking to? Also understand that they're also coming from their own experiences. And it's important for us to understand when is the right time to communicate something to them. And this is not only in bringing them closer to Allah, but even in relationships, consistently. When we're ready to speak, that's when we speak. We don't know if the other person is ready to hear, though. So it's important for us to understand and navigate that. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. And when we speak and when we bring people to Allah, make sure that we're speaking in a way that is a use of beautiful words. That we're speaking to people in a beautiful manner. Meaning that we're offering kind words, words of validation, words of encouragement, before we offer words of critique. A good manager at any place of employment is someone, for instance, who says good things and then offers the criticism, not goes straight in and offers criticism. No one likes that, right? Not even a parent to a child. It's important that when we're communicating with our children, we say good things first before we're so critical. وَالْمَوْئِدَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And that when you get into an argument, and when you have a dispute with someone, and when you get into a debate, that's fine and it's normal and it's natural many a time. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And that's the moment when you want to be even more careful with the words and the language that you speak. because that's the moment where you can make or break that moment, that relationship. Again, one word, one statement, one utterance, and the damage that it has the potential to do, we're all aware of that. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq, such that we are able to be amongst those who truly manifest the words and the advices of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, as mentioned within these lines. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad.